I graduated from high school in 38, and so this happened in 41. There was talk about the disturbance in Europe and the problems there, and there might be a war, it might eventually lead to a war. And it seemed like it was a probability. So when it happened, it was not a terrible surprise.
When Europe happened?
Yeah. Yeah, when Europe, but I'm talking about 41, that's when the United States got into it.
Mm-hmm.
That was Pearl Harbor.
Mm.
And that was broadcast on the radio. And I was in the car, I think I was driving my car downtown Detroit, and I had a girl with me and a friend. We were a couple, two couples. And when this came over the car radio, and I remember that's when we heard about it. Now, I don't remember much about our reaction, whether we were appalled or nervous or frightened or what.
But it was a surprise.
But it was, yeah. Well, here it is,
Yeah.
They said, we've been thinking it might happen now. Well, here it is, son of a gun. Well, they initiated a draft to get guys in the Army, Navy, whatever. I took the physical for a Navy. I want to get in the Navy flying.
Because you were a pilot.
I had a license, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I learned to fly at the University of Detroit. They had a civil pilot training program, and it involved learning to fly Piper Cubs. And the outfit that I went to learn to fly had a Aeronca. It was a side-by-side seater, a little different than a Piper Cub.
Yep.
And so I learned to fly there, and I got my private pilot's license, and I had done some flying around, just pleasure flying.
Yep.
And in fact, I owned an airplane. I bought an airplane, and it was $800 for an airplane at the time.
What was it?
And an Aeronca Chief.
Oh, that was.
Side by side.
Yeah.
Yeah, just the kind that I took the training in.
Uh-huh.
Had a steering wheel instead of a stick.
Yep.
And the radio was a portable. Yeah, it was a wooden box. And it had the standard broadcast channels or bands. Also had radio a tower band. So in order to land your airplane at the city of Detroit airport, which I did, that's where I bought the airplane and where I kept it, you had to have radio contact for landing and takeoff and whatnot.
Yeah. So the Navy didn't work.
Oh no, I couldn't pass the physical,
Okay.
or some other reason they said, but they suggested, well, try the Army Air Corps. And so, but there was no place that I knew of where you could apply for Army flying except in the cadet program. Eventually I was drafted as a private.
Yeah.
And in basic training, I had a chance to apply for cadet training for pilot. I was taking basic for the Army in St. Petersburg. Basic training for every soldier went through basic. You had so much PT and whatnot, and just lived the life of a soldier. Lived in a barracks and with all the other guys. Kind of get the idea of how it.
But for that cadet training, was that enlisted or was that officer?
The cadet program was also in St. Petersburg. They had their basic school there. Your rank was a cadet.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so that lasted until you graduated.
Yep.
Then on the day of graduation from flight school, you got your wings, which I was very proud of.
Yep.
And then you became either a warrant officer or a second lieutenant.
Okay.
And so I did get second lieutenant.
Yep.
And then I got my orders to go to Waco. And that was just a processing unit, and I was assigned then to Randolph Field,
Okay.
which was the Army Air Corps University kind of thing.
Yep.
It was really a nice setup for,
Yep. Randolph Field, was it?
yeah.
Yeah.
Eventually, I was in I was in a pilot pool at the time. This is because the war was kind of winding down,
Yeah.
and they had plenty of pilots at the time, and so they didn't require new graduates into the action right away.
Right.
So I was assigned to a pilot pool until they needed some more. I never did see action.
Yeah.
While I was at the base, I was assigned to another base, but I had the opportunity to learn to fly a P-40. Now that was the fighter plane at the beginning of the war,
Yeah.
but toward the end it was the P-51s and the
Yeah.
P-38s and whatnot.
Because they had to get more capability.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Supercharged.
Yeah,
and all that.
yeah, bigger, faster.
But the P-40s were what Chenault used in
Yeah.
China, wasn't it?
He took a group of B-25s off of a carrier
Mm.
and flew over Japan. And coming back, they had to ditch a lot of them because they couldn't make it back with the
It was
fuel
a
they
one-way,
could carry.
one-way mission.
So I got
So
10.
B-25, you had a friend that was a captain. He
Yeah.
was an instructor, and so you got to fly with
Well,
him.
I co-pilot.
Yeah.
I never did fly I never did pilot the airplane.
That's all right. No problem.
Yeah, yeah.
But I bet that was interesting.
But I did. They let me sit in the pilot seat while we were in the air and just kind of like steering it and maintain the course.
How easy were they to fly?
Well, the part that I had was not hard at all. But the tail gunner in the back came forward and he said, "I'm getting sick back there. We're going up and down and up and down." And he said, "What's going on up here?" So, okay, turned it back to the pilot and he kept it on the altitude.
That's funny.
But I was assigned back to Randolph Field as a maintenance officer. They didn't need flyers anymore. Some of the guys that had graduated from flying school with me, were bigger guys, and they flew bombers. They were.
Oh, yeah. Because you had to be more muscular.
You had to be bigger. Yeah, I was too light to be a bomber pilot.
Was the P-40 a pretty good plane?
Oh, it was fun to fly. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a great airplane to fly. It was fast. It was a little tricky to land. The landing gear was not too wide. And so it kind of, you really had to maintain coming down. And you hit the ground, you got to be going straight, you don't make too many turns. Otherwise, you dip a wing into the ground,
Yeah, and then that caused problems.
I was in charge of about 6 or 8 guys. And we had airplanes that were being sent to storage. They were taking them from work, collecting them from around different places, and taking them to a certain field, I think in Arizona.
Yeah.
And they're accumulating there just on the field. So it was a storage unit. And so we had some primary trainers
Yeah.
that had to be moved. Well, we collected them in San Antonio. They were gathered somehow, prepared for storage. And then we had to get a pilot for each one of them to go.
Yeah.
And so we have maybe about 6 or 8 at a time
Yeah.
go from Randolph-Field, Texas, up to somewhere in Arizona.
Yeah. How'd they get back?
Yeah. Well, then they had a pilot on a DC-3,
Oh, DC-3.
which was the typical airliner at the time, and it was just equipped for. It had benches on both sides.
Yeah. Canvas
and-
benches.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the cabin. So,
I've-
and they bring us back from the trip,
Yeah.
and I was pointed out to, made the leader of the group, I guess because I had a lieutenant bar, and most of the other guys were warrant officers. They
Oh,
were they were pilots,
Yeah.
but they just got warrant officer So I was responsible for this group. Well, we took off and flying on the way, they said, don't buzz the ground. Don't buzz the cattle. Because the farmers are complaining. They're getting their cattle scared. And this is what the guys like to do, I guess, that they buzz them and see them run. But on the way, we were all kind of spread apart, and I couldn't see everybody. But as we came in for a landing, I said, we're going to do a fighter plane landing. And that was different from the regular landing pattern. Landing pattern, you approach on a downwind leg and take a crosswind and then land into the wind. Well, with a fighter plane, you come in into the wind, kind of diving in, and then to lose speed, you go up and make a big 360 circle and come back and land. And that's the way that was done. And so we did that. And I had, I told them, we're gonna do this kind of a landing approach. So we did that, and we spaced it out pretty good. Normally there'd be one right after the other, but I had the spacing, so it was quite a bit of space in there. There was no chance of collision.
Yeah.
So we came in and I landed, and the other guys came in afterward. Right behind me, and so we were in pretty short order. We got it down, and I had the feeling that as we got into headquarters, into the operations room, that we were quite the team. That we had a kind of a flashy landing, because most of the others were bomber pilots, and they were bomber trainers. They're twin engine.
Yeah.
Twin engine. I guess there was a Cessna twin engine.
Yeah.
They call them
They weren't as agile.
No, well, they didn't get that kind of landing training.
No.
So it was just the fighter pilots that did that. So we came in like fighter pilots, and so wow, we were big stuff for that time. And well, there was another time I did fly one of those twin engines,
Yep.
and I had been riding them. I've never assigned any training to any training in it, but one time we had to take a nose wheel gear, what would you call a shock absorber kind of thing, for the nose wheel that attached from the wheel up to the frame of the airplane. They needed one at another airport in San Antonio, the other side of San Antonio from where we were at Randolph Field. And they had to get it down the other side. And okay, so they loaded it on one of these twin engine bamboo bombers, they called them. Loaded it on there, and I got in and I took off with this thing, flew the bamboo bomber solo, never having flown one before myself. And I'm wondering now, how come, why, where did I get the notion that I could do this? But I did it, and I knew there was one thing: when you're going down the runway on takeoff, be sure to maintain equal power on both engines. Because they're not very steerable otherwise. So I knew that you had to be careful about that, and so I was careful, and I managed to take off okay. And I found the other airport, landed, unloaded my thing, and flew back home. And today I wonder, how did I ever have the guts to do that, fly by myself? And instrument flying is so much simpler because you can just follow one needle. And the needle goes this way, well, you turn left. If you go that way, you turn right. Until you come in with your needle on the 12 o'clock. Well, they have these units out in the field somewhere, a big round collection of radio signals going out, and they were sending out either an A or an N.
And that told you which side of it you were on.
Yeah, which quadrant you were in, and so the object was to get between the A and the N, And the A is a dot dash, I think, or a dash dot dash, and the N is a dash dot.
Yeah.
So when the two of them come together, it's a steady beam, a steady signal.
It
So
would be.
when the two merge,
Yeah. it would
that's
be.
your beam that they're flying in. That's you're flying in on the beam,
Yeah.
and that's where you were controlled. I was in Randolph Field. I was in this. I was this base maintenance officer at the time. They had, and a second lieutenant in that job was just a flunky. This was they had civilians maintaining the airplanes,
Yeah.
so they would maintain the airplanes that were on the base, and they had a lot of B-29s at the time. But I got to taxi a few airplanes.
Yeah.
I taxied one of these, a big, real big bomber, a big pursuit plane, but it was a heavy one. Had a big radial engine in the front. I forget what they call it now. But I got into that, taxied it from one side of the hangar around, had to go to the other side. So I did that. And, but by the way, I was supposed to be the test pilot. The test pilot after the airplanes were serviced and to see if everything worked okay.
You're the guinea pig.
Yeah. So I would take it, I'd see that if you push on the left, the left rudder will turn your left, and ailerons and all that stuff. So no cross wires in there. So I checked them out first on the ground,
Yeah.
but then fly them in the air. And the guys do a good job because I never had any problem.
So the war ended.
The war ended and I was there. And I got married while I was there.
Okay.
On a blind date, one of our friends says, well, we got some nurses down at Fort Sam, and we got about 2 or 3 of them. And he said, so we arranging a blind date, we need a couple of guys. And so a friend of mine, a guy that I buddied around with, said, okay, we'll take you up on that, we'll go. And I was working in the base shop at the time. I had a desk there. But yeah, okay, we went on this date, and we met in the St. Anthony Hotel. It was a nice hotel in town, and the lobby had it was a big lobby, had nice seating in there, and they had a piano and music, a small band there playing and whatnot. But so we were in there, and we bought a bottle of whiskey, or a couple, I guess, I don't know. But I remember when the girls came in, coming into the lobby down the hall. It was a long place there. We greeted them with a bottle of whiskey in hand, and Kit was one of them.
Yeah.
And she didn't want to go on this date, but her friend persuaded her finally, because she had just come off of night duty,
Yeah.
and she was tired.
Yeah.
But she decided, well, okay, so she did go. And we went went down the street into a little restaurant and had supper, and Kit turned out, she was my date.
Yeah.
And my friend had her friend as his date, and we got along pretty good.
Yeah.
So I asked her to go out again later on. So we went and we had steak dinners, and there was a lot of steak available,
Yeah.
and a lot of beer available.
Yeah.
3-point beer.
Yeah.
Yeah, the romance blossomed, and I liked the way she reacted to different things, and
Yeah.
so, yeah. And it was good. We both, come to think of it, we both come from the same kind of a family.
Yeah.
Same kind of family values, I think. She from New York City, and me from Detroit, and it was a working class family. Both.
Yeah.
Well, after we got married, well, when the war ended, we were married in 45, only a couple of months after we met. So that was a pretty pretty fast deal. Then my parents came down. The kid and I had an apartment in San Antonio,
Okay, yep,
and then my parents came down, drove down from Detroit with a trailer behind a luggage trailer, kind of big, a big one, not just a little dinky, but anyway, we're going to haul some stuff, our gear, in the trailer, and we drove back home from there
okay,
to Detroit, and we stayed at my parents' house for a while until we found a place that we could rent. Rental spaces were short. There was a shortage of them.
now did she work as a nurse?
She, after a while, she did.
Yeah,
She was pretty much a stay-at-home.
yeah, well, she was a wartime nurse,
Yeah,
and probably
right.
had a lot of patients that were rehabilitating from,
Yeah.
came back, or just
Well,
ongoing maintenance.
yeah, but
Was
she
she a
left them all
military?
behind.
Was she a military nurse?
Yeah, she was a second lieutenant also.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so then you went to work for IBM.
Oh, eventually, I had worked before, when I was drafted, I was working in a tool shop, a tool and die shop.
Okay,
And I was apprenticed for a while on how to run a lathe.
yeah,
And so eventually I got to be, I guess, pretty good at it. And I moved around to another shop. But eventually, I heard about, I liked doing the lathe work, but I didn't like the kind of guys that I worked with. They were rough and foul-mouthed and not the kind of guys that I'd like to associate with. But then I heard of a friend of mine who came back from an IBM course and who was touting IBM as a place to work.
yeah,
And so I thought, well, that'll be better. Charles didn't like the electric typewriter. They were too sensitive. You just touch a key and blip, it'd go. Well, they preferred the pounding of the manual, and I can see why. But several places I went to, they had bought, they had a stenographer pool, and the company, they'd all send their typing down to this pool to get it done by one of these women. But they bought the IBM electric typewriters for all of them, but they all refused to use them. So they put them on the shelf until one day they decided, well, they're going to have to use them.
yeah.
So they brought them out, and I
That's
remember,
the natural progression of most.
and that was the old black machine.
Yeah.
They called it an IBM Electromatic. It had a little motor in the back. That was a problem because it had a governor on it with brushes.
All little brushes.
Yeah, little brushes. They wear out or they get dirty or something. So that was the first one. Later on, the machines they got induction motors with no brushes, and I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Well, they work just by magnetism.
yeah,
They operated what they call a power roll, rubber power roll, rubber coated, kind of soft, not too hard a rubber. And then they had a cam for every key, every type key. So there was a row of cams, and then when you hit a key, through some linkage, it would release the cam, and the cam would go around, and as it went up, the type bar came up.
oh my God.
And
But that was way better than the alternatives.
well, that was better than the manual. But the manual was just the linkage, but it was a power from your finger that operated it. But with the electromatic, you just trip a lever, and which was a light pressure, and the cam would do the work. And well, like today, on a keyboard here like this, I have one that is so sensitive that I kind of rest my finger on it and it fires. Well, out of Detroit first. Then I got transferred to Jackson, Michigan, small town in the middle of the state. We had a house that was a farm. And it was a kind of a rural setting, and I thought that was better than Detroit, the city. Although I liked the city of Detroit as a place to grow up, I think was ideal for me at the time. We lived in a neighborhood of a working class group, and a lot of houses right in a row, packed tight on every block. And we had the backyard and then a garage at the back of the yard and an alley behind. And you drove the alley into your garage from the alley. Few places had driveways along the side, but most of them came from the back and entered the garage from the alley. Well, the alley was a good place to play.
Yeah.
We played ball, baseball, tennis, or bat the ball up against the garage door. We'd find a garage that was a smooth surface, and we used that. Well, somebody else's garage, I don't know how whether they liked it or approved it, but I never got any complaints. But
What was that about?
1952, we moved from Detroit to Jackson, Michigan. And the service area was a pretty widespread service area, so I had to do a lot of driving to get to my customers,
Yeah.
and that was good. That was all right too.
You ended up in Kentucky for a while. Then-
Well, with IBM, I was transferred from Detroit to Jackson, and then from Jackson to Lexington, Kentucky, at the plant.
There you go.
And I was an instructor on typewriters repair.
Yeah.
There. The next step would be to be a manager of an office of a serviceman, or they call them customer engineers
Yeah.
instead of typewriter servicemen. Manage the customer engineering section of a branch office.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't feel really comfortable in going that direction. So they came out with a new model typewriter, and they sent one to me to evaluate in an early stages. And one of the things connected with that was a trip to the plant in Lexington, and through there I got the notion that I'd like to be transferred to Lexington. That'd be fine.
Yep.
So I put in an application, and so they moved me to Lexington,
Yeah.
and so I worked there as an instructor. Then I got from there into product evaluation, where we would take sample machines off the line, bring them into our place, and use them.
Run them through their paces.
Yeah, and report on problems they had, and then we have to communicate back and see if they got corrected.
You're a test pilot.
Yeah, jumped over the lazy dog.
You
Yeah,
probably did that many times, didn't you?
yeah. That's one of the things I did. There was another one, and I can't think of it right now, but if I had more time to prepare for this, I could have.
This is good. Don't feel.
But anyway, yeah, well, that was good. Amaranth, Orinoco, Uruguay. I got all the letters in the alphabet, and and then so you type them, and then that exercised everyone. Yeah, it was really good. Well, then I went into product testing lab,
Yeah.
and where we would test them in a laboratory, put them on robots to operate them for so many days or
Yep.
hours.